The lights of the studio pulsed like a living thing, refracting off polished glass, cameras gliding silently across the floor. The audience buzzed with the casual expectancy of daytime television, unaware that history was about to write itself in raw, unfiltered emotion. The View had seen its share of clashes, of laughter and tears, but never before had it drawn blood this way. Leonardo DiCaprio sat at the center of the table, his presence almost unnatural against the backdrop of a talk show set. He was not a politician, not a pundit, yet the weight of his reputation carried a sharper edge than most who entered these walls. Calm, measured, dressed in muted tones, he gave every impression of the Hollywood statesman he had carefully become. But behind the neutral expression, there was a storm, and the storm was looking for a crack. The conversation began like any other, polite nods, warm applause, the hosts framing his career with admiration, recounting his Oscar speech, his philanthropy, his role as an activist. The crowd leaned forward, expecting inspiration, but when the subject shifted, from cinema to survival, from fame to climate collapse, the tone of the air thickened. Sunny Hostin leaned toward him, her tone soft yet probing. "Leonardo, you've spoken at the United Nations. You've stood on the biggest stages in the world and demanded action. But when you say governments are failing, when you warn that history will judge them, do you ever feel the same judgment turning back toward you?" DiCaprio inhaled slowly, his jaw tightening, a flicker of unease shadowing his eyes. He chose his words carefully, his voice steady. "Of course I feel it. I know what's at stake. And I know that every single one of us carries responsibility, me included." A murmur rippled through the studio, approval mixed with doubt. The camera panned across faces in the audience, some nodding, some skeptical, all locked in anticipation. It was Meghan McCain who struck the first true blow, her voice sharp, deliberate. "But Leonardo, you've built a life of luxury, private jets, yachts, homes most people can't imagine. Do you really think you can sit here and lecture working Americans about sacrifice while you burn more fuel in a week than they do in a year?" The words landed like a hammer against glass. The studio hushed. A flicker of tension ran across DiCaprio's face, the faintest crease at the corner of his mouth. He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming once against the table. The illusion of untouchable composure faltered, if only for a second. He answered with measured restraint, though the strain showed in his voice. "I invest in carbon offsets. I fund renewable projects. I do everything in my power to mitigate." McCain cut in, relentless. "That's not the point. People see you flying private while telling them to cut back. Doesn't that weaken your message? Doesn't that make you the very face of Hollywood hypocrisy?" The audience stirred. A few gasps, a nervous laugh from somewhere in the back. The producers leaned forward in the control room, eyes darting between monitors, sensing the moment crack open. DiCaprio's hand pressed flat against the table now, his eyes locked onto McCain's, his voice sharpened, just slightly. "This isn't about me. This is about science, about survival, about facts that will not go away just because I'm an imperfect messenger." The tension was no longer subtle. It was alive, vibrating through the air, pulling every person on set into its grip. The studio, once a stage for light banter and rehearsed laughter, had transformed into something else entirely. A courtroom without gavels, a trial unfolding in real time. And in that moment, Leonardo DiCaprio was no longer the Hollywood icon, no longer the Oscar-winning actor. He went, as a man under cross-examination, his every word a defense, his every hesitation an admission. The nation leaned in closer, waiting to see whether he would break or explode. The hum of the studio lights seemed louder now, as though the machinery itself could feel the air tightening. Leonardo DiCaprio leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, the posture of a man rehearsing calm while his pulse betrayed him. The conversation had shifted, no longer framed by admiration, but by suspicion. Sunny Hostin smiled with practiced warmth. "You've often quoted your UN speech, Leonardo. You told world leaders, you can make history or be vilified by it. Do you feel the urgency is stronger today than it was then?" DiCaprio straightened, his voice steady, rehearsed. "Yes, stronger than ever. Every year we delay, the consequences grow worse. Droughts, storms, fires. They're not predictions anymore, they're realities. The audience nodded, some clapping lightly. For a brief moment the balance seemed restored, but the reprieve didn't last. Meghan McCain leaned forward, her pen tapping against the table, her eyes locked on him like a cross-examiner preparing the next strike. Leonardo, you talk about sacrifice. You talk about governments failing, but let me ask you directly. How many times did you fly private this year? The question dropped like a stone in water, rippling instantly through the studio. A few heads in the audience turned, whispering. The camera zoomed closer to DiCaprio's face. His jaw tightened, just as it had before. He took a breath. I invest in carbon offsets. I support renewable. She cut in, her voice sharp, refusing him cover. Offsets don't erase reality. People see the yachts, they see the jets, they see the luxury, and they hear you telling them to give up meat, to give up cars, to make sacrifices. Don't you see the contradiction? DiCaprio's hand twitched against the table. He leaned forward, his voice lower, weightier. Do you think I don't ask myself that every day? Do you think I'm blind to it? But this isn't about optics. It's about survival. The planet doesn't care what car I drive. The planet is collapsing because corporations, governments, entire industries refuse to act. The studio buzzed, the energy raw, unsettled. Joy Behar interjected, her tone softer, almost a rescue attempt. But Meghan's point is what people think, Leo. Perception matters. It's the reality of politics. If you're the face of this movement, doesn't your image undercut your own message? The words stung. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the audience. Their faces were a gallery of judgment, some sympathetic, some cold, all expectant. He tried again, more forceful now. I'm not perfect. None of us are. But I use every resource I have to push for change. If my voice can reach places others can't, then it's my duty to use it, flaws and all. A nervous laugh broke from somewhere in the studio seats, quickly silenced by the tension hanging in the air. The control room whispered frantically into headsets, knowing the segment was veering off script, but unwilling to look away. McCain didn't flinch. She leaned back, her words deliberate, her tone almost surgical. So you admit the hypocrisy. You admit the contradictions. How do you expect people to trust you when you're not living by the rules you demand of them? For a heartbeat, DiCaprio said nothing. His silence carried weight, heavy enough to make the entire studio lean in. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, his voice stripped of polish. Because this isn't about me. It never was. It's about your children, my children. Every future that won't exist if we keep pretending perfection matters more than survival. His words cut through the air, not triumphant but raw. The audience erupted into mixed applause and murmurs, half support, half doubt. The spark had been struck, and everyone in the room knew it. The panel shifted in their seats, eyes flicking between one another, the air buzzing with the realization that this was no longer daytime chatter. It was something sharper, something more dangerous. For DiCaprio, there was no going back. The first wound had been opened, and the confrontation had only just begun. The studio no longer felt like a talk show. The laughter that usually filled these walls had evaporated, leaving behind the suffocating hush of a courtroom. The table, once a set piece, had become an impromptu bench. The women of The View sat like a jury split against itself, voices rising and colliding in arguments that reached far beyond celebrity gossip. Joy Behar broke the silence first, her voice dry but cutting. Look, Leonardo, no one denies the planet's in crisis. But when you talk about governments failing, when you warn about history judging us, you put yourself in the role of judge and jury too. Don't you think people resent being lectured by someone who lives a life of privilege they'll never know? DiCaprio's lips parted, his reply measured but taut. I'm not lecturing, I'm warning. The science doesn't care who delivers the message. But before the words could settle, Whoopi Goldberg lifted her hand, her tone more tempered, as if to soften the blow. I hear you, Leo, but you gotta understand, the optics do matter. People want leaders who walk the walk, not just talk the talk. You can't separate the message from the messenger. It was no longer a debate. It was cross-examination. The audience shifted in their seats, leaning forward, their eyes darting from one speaker to the next. A young man in the second row whispered, "He's on trial right now." Another replied, "And the whole country's watching." McCain seized the moment. Her tone sharpened like steel. "You've made yourself the face of climate change. That comes with responsibility. If you want people to listen, you can't just demand sacrifices from everyone else while you live in excess." DiCaprio snapped back, his composure cracking further. "I've poured millions into environmental foundations. I've traveled to the Arctic, to the Amazon. I've seen devastation firsthand. I'm using my platform to sound alarms that leaders ignore. What more do you expect from me?" McCain's retort came like a final strike. "Consistency. Integrity. If you ask others to give up, you should give up too." The words hung heavy in the studio air, pulling the room into silence. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate, their lenses lingering on DiCaprio's face as though awaiting a verdict. For a moment he looked less like a Hollywood star and more like a man cornered in the dock, the weight of his choices stacked against him. His eyes flickered toward the audience again, scanning the rows of faces that stared back like jurors, their expressions unreadable, their judgment inescapable. Narration flowed through the scene like a quiet gavel. The View had become more than a talk show. It had become a tribunal. DiCaprio was the defendant, the panelists, his interrogators, and the jury wasn't just the audience in that room. It was the millions at home, streaming the confrontation, dissecting every word in real time. The pressure mounted, visible in the shallow breaths he drew, in the way his hand pressed against the table as though grounding himself. He tried again, his voice raw now. "I'm not asking for sainthood. I'm asking for survival. If we waste time crucifying every person who dares to speak out because they aren't perfect, then we lose everything." The words hit like a plea, somewhere between testimony and confession. The audience erupted in applause, though not unanimously. Some clapped, others sat stiff, arms crossed. The division was visible, palpable. The camera cut back to McCain, her eyes unyielding. Joy shook her head, muttering into her mic. Whoopi leaned back, exhaling heavily, as though even she felt the crushing weight of the exchange. It was clear now, the debate wasn't just about Leonardo DiCaprio anymore. It was about the right to speak, the burden of privilege, and the cruel calculus of credibility. The man who came to deliver a message had found himself tried by the very public he sought to persuade, and the trial was far from over. The pressure that had been simmering finally erupted. Leonardo DiCaprio leaned forward, his voice rising above the chorus of interruptions, his hand striking the table with a sharp crack that echoed across the studio. The audience gasped, their murmurs cutting through the silence like static. This was not the polished actor giving a press interview. This was a man whose patience had splintered, a man unshackled from the script. "Enough," he said, the word trembling with fury. His eyes locked on Meghan McCain, his tone stripped of politeness. "This isn't about my flights, or yachts, or dinners. This is about science. It's about survival. And every second we waste nitpicking personalities is another second we lose fighting the real war." The crowd erupted. Applause, shouts, gasps colliding into a chaos of sound. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing beads of sweat forming along his brow, the tension carved into the lines of his face. McCain, undeterred, folded her arms. "You can't separate yourself from the message, Leonardo. You live in excess and then expect others to sacrifice. That's the hypocrisy people won't forgive." He slammed the table again, his voice booming now, no longer measured. "And what do you want me to do? Disappear? Stay silent? Pretend the problem isn't real because I don't meet your standards of purity? The oceans don't care if I fly coach or private. The forests don't care what house I sleep in. They are burning regardless." His words carried the rhythm of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, the weight of desperation pressing every syllable. "Able." He listed statistics rapid fire, as though unloading evidence. "The past 8 years have been the hottest on record, millions displaced by floods and fires, entire ecosystems collapsing before our eyes. That is reality. That is the crime being committed while we waste time debating optics." The studio audience responded with a wave of clapping, whistles, and scattered shouts. The tension was electric, visceral, spilling from the stage into the crowd. Whoopi leaned forward, her hands raised in an attempt to calm the storm. Leonardo, I hear you. I think we all hear you. But people want to see leaders live the change they preach. That's the point. It's not about silence, it's about credibility. DiCaprio's chest rose and fell quickly, his anger colliding with exhaustion. He turned toward Whoopi, his voice softening but still sharp. Credibility won't matter when the air is unbreathable, when the crops fail, when cities drown. We are arguing about optics while the world is collapsing around us. Joy Behar jumped in, her tone edged with exasperation. But Leo, don't you see? You're making it personal now. This isn't just about you against Meghan. This is about how Americans feel, that they're being blamed, shamed, while elites continue to live however they want. He exhaled heavily, his voice dropping lower, more deliberate. And that's exactly what the fossil fuel lobby wants. They want us divided, turning on each other, arguing about who recycles while they pump billions of tons of carbon into the air. They want to turn me into the distraction. They want this debate about me, so no one focuses on them. The words struck differently. The room quieted, the audience murmurs dissolving into a thoughtful silence. But McCain wasn't finished. You're deflecting. You can blame corporations all day long, but if the messenger is broken, the message collapses. It's a distraction. That's reality. DiCaprio's face flushed, his voice thundering again. The message is not collapsing. The planet is collapsing. And if you want to crucify me for saying it, then fine.